Peri-urban spaces have largely been theorised in academic literature as the interface between urban and rural areas. These spaces on the fringe of cities and towns are sites of extraordinary transformation as different values on the land come into direct competition with each other. Australia's peri-urban areas are characterised by spatially selective population shifts, with counter-urbanisation and peri-urbanisation forces generating differentiated land use patterns. The contending land values on the fringe provides both opportunities and challenges for planning and governance of peri-urban areas. The thesis is structured in three main sections. The first section seeks to characterise and define peri-urban spaces and demographic change through an academic literature review. The second section examines the role of planning in managing competing land use agendas in peri-urban spaces, and this is contextualised through a review of recent WA state government planning strategies for Perth and Peel. The third section is the case study, examining how the Shire of Serpentine-Jarrahdale can be characterised as a peri-urban area and how rapid peri-urbanisation forces are transforming the landscape. In simple terms, the peri-urban is the land between the built-up edge of cities and the countryside. This space encompasses the urbanised fringe of cities as well as the spaces into which they expand both physically and functionally. I describe the peri-urban as an elusive space because although there is generally agreement about where peri-urban areas are located, debate about its form, size, rate of expansion and socio-economic impacts continues. From a planning perspective, managing peri-urbanising forces involves the management of a landscape that is continually changing. Rural amenity is a quality relating to two aspects of a locale. Firstly is the relative attractiveness of the general environment in which it is set, and secondly, more specifically, the qualities or facilities of the locale itself. Argent et al. State that amenity-led migration to favoured rural areas is frequently considered a key subset of counter-urbanisation. I will look now at growth processes in peri-urban areas, looking at peri-urbanisation and counter-urbanisation forces. Fisher's research on suburbanisation growth processes showed that population associated with peri-urbanisation effects were primarily young couples with dependent children who often commute to the city for work. Butt's 2013 research also showed the socio-economic descriptor of displaced suburbia, and this was linked to younger working families located close to commuter infrastructure. The impacts of this peri-urbanisation force is manifested in suburban estate-type dwellings. And you can see on the left here, I've included an example from the case study of a suburban estate-type dwelling. This is at Whitby, to give you a sense of how peri-urban forces are manifested in residential land use patterns. Counter-urbanisation forces, in contrast, can occur in peri-urban areas and also arise in more remote rural areas. The counter-urbanisation growth process in Fisher's model involves counter-urbanites who aim to replace an urban lifestyle with a more rural one. This more rural lifestyle is manifested in ultra-low density rural residential or rural living settlements in dispersed spatial patterns. And to give you a sense of what a more rural lifestyle looks like, I've included this photo on the right, which is also from the case study area. You can see rural living settlements are usually on fairly large lots, usually 1 to 40 acres in size, and they may be dispersed amongst the trees, or they may be large enough to have a hobby farm, or in the case of Serpentine-Jarrahdale, there's a lot of horse keeping that happens on these properties. In Australia, peri-urban planning has typically fallen back on conventional urban planning methods that fail to recognise the unique characteristics of these spaces. These planning methods have traditionally viewed the peri-urban as a space for urban expansion. Putting this into a WA context, in her assessment of the 2010 WA State Government Planning Framework called Directions 2031, Hasler Mackenzie wrote that productive agricultural land has increasingly been developed for housing. In this way, the primacy of urban development in peri-urban areas is clear. She uses a quote from Directions 2031, which states that rural land should be protected until conversion to urban use is required. So this isn't just about the primacy of urban development, it's also the primacy of urban expansion into peri-urban areas. Perth and Peel at 3.5 million is a state government planning strategy that seeks to limit new rural living developments as a key planning objective. And this is done in order to protect agricultural and environmental land values in peri-urban areas. The plan states that food production areas that are close to population centres should be maintained, and this means that rural living proposals will be considered only by exception. And you will recall that rural living settlements are aligned with the counter-urbanisation forces that I discussed earlier. When rural living proposals are to be considered, one of the factors is that the proposed land does not have the capacity for full urban development, which is continuing the trend touched upon by Haslam Mackenzie concerning the primacy of urban development in these strategies. So it's really privileging the sort of peri-urbanisation effects that you may have in peri-urban areas over rural living settlements. When looking at the plan's proposed connected city model, we see that there are efforts to reduce sprawling urban development in the city's peri-urban areas through infill development in the metropolitan area, but still the model recommends urban development in selected peri-urban areas. And some of the localities in the selected urban areas, which you can see here, are located in the Shire of Serpentine-Jarrahdale, which is my case study area that I will now discuss. The Shire of Serpentine-Jarrahdale is located approximately 45 kilometres southeast of Perth CBD. It's about 905 square kilometres in size and features some highly valued natural attributes such as the Serpentine Falls National Park and the Darling Scarp. The area is predominantly zoned rural under the state-controlled Metropolitan Region Scheme zoning, which is a layer of land use planning underneath the local government zoning. There are two district centres, with Byford in the north, located about here, and Mundijong, which is just to the south of Byford. Since 2004, Shire of Serpentine-Jarrahdale has had an average population growth rate of 6.2%. The previous growth rate of 2.7% a year occurred over the last 2 decades and was mainly due to counter-urbanisation effects. It is anticipated that peri-urbanisation forces will dominate into the future. WA Tomorrow data prepared by the West Australian Planning Commission, or WAPC, forecasted that the Shire will have a projected population growth rate of 94% from 2006 to 2026. This is the largest growth rate for all of Perth's local government areas, excluding the City of Perth local government area. And you can see on the right here, peri-urbanisation effects are showing up in the demographics, with parents and home builders aged 35 to 49 high in the age profile for the Shire, and this links back to Fisher's suburbanisation growth process of working commuter families with dependent children. And you can see here in the aerial image of Byford, this is really showing how rapid the peri-urbanisation forces are transforming the landscape in this district centre. So in a very short period of time, you've seen this sort of suburbanisation and urban growth coming into this area and really changing it to a more concentrated land use settlement pattern. And moving down now to Mundijong, which is just south of Byford, and Mundijong is actually located in that circle. It's quite a traditional country town, even today when you visit it, but to the northeast of Mundijong there is a brand new housing development in the locality of Whitby. And when you look at the marketing for the Whitby housing development, you can really see it's picking up on some of those demographics that come with peri-urbanisation forces discussed earlier. So, for example, it's showing the proximity of the housing development to the future Tonkin Highway extension, to the Southwestern Highway, proximity to Perth CBD, and it's also showing things that a family with dependent children would be interested in having, such as a future primary school on site and a future high school on site. And linking back to Butt's descriptor of displaced suburbia, if you look at the whole picture, you can really get a sense of what displaced suburbia looks like on the ground. So you've got this very concentrated suburban or urban settlement, which is actually surrounded by rural and rural living sort of settlement patterns. Counter-urbanisation forces, I'll look at that now. This is a cadastre map from the Shire of Serpentine-Jarrahdale Rural Strategy, and the shades of light yellow indicate the agricultural land use that's happening in the area still. That's about 40 hectares, and the rest of the shading, excluding the grey, is generally rural living development. So you can see it's quite a significant part of the Shire. This is Oakford, which is one of the rural living zones in the Shire of Serpentine-Jarrahdale, and I've just included this to give you a sense of what rural living looks like on the ground. So you can see it's quite large lot sizes, dispersed land use settlement patterns. Being Oakford, there'd be a lot of horsekeeping happening here, perhaps some bridle trails connecting through. And when you look at Oakford as a locality within the broader Byford area where it's found, you can really get a sense of the contrast between how peri-urbanisation forces is transforming the landscape in terms of suburbanisation and urban growth, contrasted with the counter-urbanisation effects that lead to the more rural living style land use settlement pattern. The rural strategy has guided development in Shire Serpentine-Jarrahdale since 1994. One of the key themes identified by the Council during the 2013 review process was the desire for the Shire to retain its rural identity and avoid becoming an outer metropolitan urbanised environment. And I've included this quote here because it really demonstrates the way, from I guess the council or the community's perspective, rural living is seen as a legitimate mechanism to house this growing population, while ensuring that the very highly valued rural character or rural amenity of the area is maintained. The rural strategy was adopted by the Shire in 2014, and in 2016 the WAPC resolved to provide in-principle support for the review, subject to 19 modifications which you can see here. And 5 of the modifications not supported by Shire Serpentine-Jarrahdale planning officers relate to rural zones. So you can really see in this way rural zones have kind of become a bit of a battleground in some of these peri-urban areas, with the WAPC wanting to lift some of that rural living zoning from the rural strategy in this case, in order to, I guess, privilege concentrated urban expansion and also protect agricultural and environmental land uses. But then on the other hand, you've got a Shire who is looking to include rural living as part of its future planning and as an important mechanism to preserve rural amenity in the face of this rapid peri-urbanisation. So overall, the analysis has demonstrated that there has been some progress in the management of Perth's peri-urban areas in terms of recognising the peri-urban and identifying the protection of food production in these areas as a key priority. However, the continuation of an urban-focused policy arena that sees peri-urban spaces primarily as sites of urban expansion, combined with influential market forces and the ongoing neoliberalisation of WA state planning arena, will continue to produce a rapidly urbanising landscape. Therefore, it remains to be seen if protection of agricultural land uses will be effective in the long term. Strategies to limit rural living developments has also highlighted key tensions with the local government objective to use rural living developments to retain its highly valued rural amenity. A peri-urban policy may help to resolve some of these planning challenges. As a minimum, planning for peri-urban areas needs to adapt to reflect to the characteristics of multifunctional peri-urban areas so they are more responsive to the unique challenges found in these spaces. Acknowledge the importance of peri-urban land with regulatory tools to protect food security at a local level and a state level. And lastly, there needs to be greater integration of local and state government planning strategies to reduce outcomes where non-local factors are the main drivers of local change. These are my references. Any questions?